Welcome to part 2 of using the browser within Studio One 3. Now in part 1 we took a look at the Home, Instruments, and Effects tabs, and in part 2 we're going to take a closer look at some of the features in the Instruments and Effects tabs, and then move on to take a look at the Loops, Files, and the Cloud tabs. The Pool tab, this is actually going to get its own video. It's an important tab to make use of when we're working with our songs and keeping track of all of our recordings and audio files that we may be using in that particular song. Now before we move on to the File and Effects tabs, I just want to mention the importance of the information panel down at the bottom of our browser. If we remember to pay attention to this area, it can really help us identify where we're at, detailed information about any file we may have selected, as well as giving us access to our preview player with which we can play or audition our audio and MIDI files. So if I say the loops here and select, this gives us an idea of where we are here. If I then click there, we can see, and then as I click here, if I select an actual file, then we have the preview player. So just keeping in mind that if you're really down deep into a directory, you can use this and you'll see a file path for most of wherever you're navigating at. And this applies to even with the files. And then this gives us information about a particular sound set. So this is going to update dynamically depending on whatever we're working with. And just remember that this is available to you with more in-depth information and file paths and file information that can be useful to you. Now let's take a closer look at the Instruments tab. Now we've already covered these up at the top here, as well as down below. At the very top though, we've got multi-instruments, and we've got a folder where we can choose from a variety of types of multi-instruments, and just click, and these are presets that we can drag in if we'd like to make use of a multi-instrument. Below that we have Note Effects, and this is going to apply MIDI effects to any instruments that we are using. So if I were to bring in a mojito and then apply this arpeggiator to that track, and let me choose a preset, and if I go ahead and play this back, okay, so that's not the best patch to use for that, but just you can see what's going on here and how we can bring in MIDI effects from that folder there. Next we have our favorite section, and we can just click to expand that out. I don't have any favorites added, but we'll take a quick look at how we can do that. Next we have Recent, which will display the last 10 instruments that we have brought in. Now if we would like to add a favorite to our favorites folder, all that we would need to do is expand out a folder where we have our instruments. We can then right click and then choose to favorite that. So now if we come up to our favorites, then we've got the Mai Tai in there. Another way that we can accomplish that is by clicking the wrench here. This will allow us to manage our plugins. So simply by clicking, and then we can see that we have a star next to the Mai Tai. That's because I right clicked and added it as a favorite. We can then deselect that or choose other VSTs that we would like to add. And while we're here, we can take a look at the show and hide icon here. So if I click this here, then this will hide the instruments. We can close out our management there, and then those instruments have disappeared from our Personas folder. If we would like to add them back, we would just need to click the wrench, select them, and then now they're back. We could also have right clicked on any instrument and choose to hide as well. Now I'm sure you've noticed that when we access our Personas instruments, they are all represented with a thumbnail image, and we can actually hide those by clicking this icon here, and then we have a text representation of those instruments. I'll click that to show those again. I also have some third-party VSTs, and if I expand out the native instruments folder, what if we'd like to add a thumbnail image to these? Well, I can bring in the battery, and then I'll just pull this up to the top here. If we come over to this drop-down arrow here, at the very bottom we can choose to update plugin in thumbnail. Now when you're doing this, keep in mind that whatever you have showing here is going to be captured. Studio One's going to take a screenshot of this and then use that as a thumbnail. So I actually want to come to the library, come to the kits, and I'll just load a kit up. And then I will come back and update plugin thumbnail, close out a battery, and we can see now we have a thumbnail image of that kit that we loaded and of battery. And this of course can be applied to any third-party effects that we're using as well. Now let's take a closer look at the folder view. And with the folder view, our instruments are going to be grouped into folders in alphabetical order. So we've got sampler, synth, and so far we've got our PreSonus Studio One instruments in these, but we also have these loose third-party VSTs in there. So how can we go ahead and manage this and create or add these to the folders? Now the battery is a drum sampler, so that fits along with the sample folder. So all we'd really need to do is just drag that, move to sampler, and then we release it, and we can see now our battery 4 is within our sampler folder, and it is no longer loose here within the main area of our browser. We could also right click, create a new folder. We could call this native instruments. Okay. And then we could select this whole group. I'll hold down Shift, select the bottom, and then drag this into our native instruments folder. And then now we can see they're all contained within there, and everything's neatly organized within folders. If we would like to get rid of a folder, I can just right click and choose delete folder, and this is going to place all of the instruments back as they were within the main area of the browser. So I'll go ahead and delete that out. Do we want to really do that? Yes. And so now our instruments return as they were. And of course, if we'd like to move our battery back out, we can just simply drag it back out to the main area. We also have the option to rename any folder that we'd like just by right-clicking, and then we can rename. If we've made any changes and as time goes by we decide that we're not happy with things as they are, at least as far as our favorite settings and what is shown or hidden, as we saw a moment ago, we can right-click in the browser and choose to reset to return it back to its default settings. So if I right-click here, choosing reset will basically put everything back as it was, and if we choose revert, we can use this if we've opened up a new song, began to make some adjustments, but we decided no, we don't want to keep those, but just what we've done in that current session, we can choose revert, and then all of the settings will return back to as they were when we initially opened the song. Now let's move on to the effects tab here, and up at the very top we have a section for effects chains, and these are presets that are put together. So if you're, say, recording a vocalist, you can come to the vocals folder, click here. If it's female and you're doing pop, you can click there and just drag this in. Studio One then creates an audio track, and we can see that we have a group of effects added in a chain. We've got a compressor, Pro EQ, room verb, and these each have their own adjustments that have been made by PreSonus. And then next, what do we have here? We've got mix effects, and so this will give us access to the console shaper, and there are actually some presets here as well. And we've already taken a look at favorites and recent. These will function the same as within the instrument tab. So we can now move on to the loops tab, and basically here we can access any of our loops that we have on our system, and we have a 3-category or 3-tiered sorting system. So how this works is that the first one here is going to determine what folders are shown initially. This is our top level. So right now we have style selected, so we can see we've got blues, classical, country, dubstep, so that this makes sense. If we were to change this to instrument, then we can see we've got bass, bells, brass, drums, and so on. We can then come to character, aggressive, animated. I'll just come back to and we can keep going on here, even by product. I'll actually come back to the style. So now, after we've made this first selection, we would then come to a folder. Maybe I'll just choose the minimal here. That looks pretty sparse. I'll choose the pop. There's probably more here. Yeah. So then once we open up the folder, we can come to the second tier, and we can see we've got product selected, so it's showing by product. But we can choose style, but we've already got that there. So let me choose something different. I'll choose instrument. So you can see we're still in pop, but now we have bells, brass, vocal, synth. So then let's go ahead and expand out our guitar. This is the third category, or the third tier, and we can see that we have product active. So we're seeing products that are within this instrument category, and the instrument category is within style, and the style is pop. And of course we can then come in and change this to character, and this will then update. We could choose vendor. So this is how we can really navigate and hone in on the particular type of loops that we're looking for within our song. Now, before we leave the loop section here, just keep in mind that we can select a loop, and then we have our preview player. And also, you know, as we talked about in the beginning of the video, this is important to pay attention to, because we can see a lot more information about this loop. We can see the sample rate, the bit depth, we have the BPM, how long it is, what type of file it is. It's an audio loop. And then, of course, we can come in and play back. We can stop, and if you notice, it stops where the position of the loop stops exactly where we stopped it. If we'd like to return it back to the beginning, we can just click stop again, then it comes back to the very beginning. Here we can activate or deactivate our loop, and then with this we can choose to play our loop or audio files back at whatever our song tempo is here. So if I choose that and go ahead and play back, we can definitely hear how that's been affected by choosing to play it back at 120 beats per minute, especially given that the file is at 65, so it's essentially playing back at twice the speed. And I'll actually go ahead and deselect that. And let's move on to our Files tab. When working with the Files tab, it's going to give you access to all of the files within your PC, and you can liken it to the Explorer window within Windows or the Finder on the Mac. And when we're here, we can import WAV files, AIFF, Rex, OGG, Vorbis, FLAC, MP3, Studio One's audio loops and music loops, Apple loops if you're on the Mac, standard MIDI files, and video files as well. So we can get a lot of content brought into Studio One by using the Files tab. Now we've got 3 subcategories or 3 subtabs within the Files tab. Now if I select Files here, this is going to access all of our folders and files on our computer directory. Next we have Studio One, and this will give us access directly to our Studio One content, which is what we have set in our options. So if I control comma and bring up the options menu and come to our locations and the user data, so whatever we have set here, this is our default location for storing our presets, our songs, our projects, the demos, all of that. I'll cancel out so we can see that's our songs are here, our demos, presets, any that we've created. I've actually only got one preset that I've created so far, and that's for Impact, and that's actually where my default preset that I have saved is stored. Now with the Servers tab, the manual states that this displays specific cloud services that Studio One interfaces with, but as far as I can tell, it seems to be what we have here is just another way of accessing files, as we've seen in some of these other tabs here. So we'll come back to the main Files tab, and then I'm going to navigate to my sounds. We can just navigate by clicking the arrow there, or also by clicking once on a folder. This is my sounds and samples, and we're just going to take a look at some of the features that we have available to us within the Files tab. If we right click, then I can choose to set this as a root. I can create a new folder within there. We can rename that folder, delete, new tab, new root, close tab. So we've got a lot of different options. And what are these? Let's start with setting as root. If I choose to set as root, then it's basically going to set this as the root folder whenever we come back to our Files tab. Then instead of having File here, we're going to go directly to our Sounds and Samples folder, or wherever you would like to set that to. Now, a better way of doing that would be just adding it in addition to that initial File tab that we had. So if I right click, we can reset the root, and now we come back to this Files as it is by default within Studio One. So a better way that we could do this is by right clicking and then choosing New Tab from here. And now we have a new tab where we can instantly access our sounds and samples, where we may have everything that we work with and want to use in our song or any song that we're working on. And this can save us a lot of time instead of navigating down and digging through folders. So if I right click again, we can choose up, and this is just going to move the root here to the folder that's just above Sounds and Samples. We can also close that tab, and we can actually add as many tabs as we like. If it starts to get full up here in this area, then you're going to end up with a drop down arrow where you can choose from all of the tabs that you have added up at the top. Something else that can be helpful for you, if you are navigating within your folders here, I'm going to come back to my Sounds and Samples, choose Field Samples, Random Sounds. Now first, of course, we can, like with our loops, we can choose an audio file, see detailed information, sample rate 44.1, 16-bit, how long it is. We can play back, volume control. But what I really wanted to show you is that we've really dug down through our directory here. A quick way of closing all of this up is we can hold down Alt while pressing the up arrow on our keyboard, and that's going to collapse that back to as it was when we initially opened up the tab. Now our last tab is the cloud, because as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, I'm going to just do a complete video on the pull. Within the cloud tab, we have the Persona shop, and here you can directly purchase extensions, loops and sounds, plugins, sampler instruments, anything that you'd like to get from the Persona shop. If I go ahead and expand out the loops and sounds, then you can see we've got a subfolder as well as things that we can click on directly, and we can see our price. We can sample some of the sounds. So that's the loops and sounds. We've got sample instruments, And of course, with each one that we click on, we can sample the sounds, get a brief description, or choose to buy directly there. And below that, we have our Personas Exchange. And this is where we can share contact with other Studio One 3 users or Studio One users. If I go ahead and expand that out, we can see we have access to extensions, effects chains, grooves. So if I select grooves, we can then choose from these different users. If I select that, I'll choose this Akai MPC 1000 groove. And then we've got a little bit of information here, and then the option to install. So we can also come down to top rated and see what's there. And of course, we've got this brief information as well as an install. So this is just something to explore if you'd like to see what's out there. And below that, we have SoundCloud. And if you have a SoundCloud account, this is another area where you can go ahead and connect with that and upload files and do other functions here. I actually don't have a SoundCloud account, so I can't really go into more detail with that and show you examples, but just know that that's there. And so we've made it through the first of these tabs, and all that we have left is the pull. So hope that you got some useful information from this. I know it's not the most exciting topic, but if you stuck through, then thanks for watching, and hope to see you in the pull video.